The city pulsed with its usual cacophony: blaring horns, the rhythmic tap of heels on pavement, the melancholy strains of a street performer's violin. Yet, amidst this familiar symphony, no one had time for the profound hush that was about to descend upon La Fontaine, one of the city's most exclusive French bistros. There, at a corner table, sat Elliot Vaughan, a billionaire venture capitalist. From his impeccably tailored charcoal suit to his slicked-back silvering hair and gleaming Rolex, everything about him screamed success. But behind the facade of material abundance, his heart had long grown quiet, a mirror of the grey sky outside his penthouse office. Lunch at La Fontaine was just another emotionless business meeting, a predictable ritual in his meticulously curated solitary life. He certainly didn't expect her. The restaurant itself gleamed with polished cutlery and sparkled under soft, sophisticated jazz. Waiters moved like dancers, anticipating every unspoken need. Elliot, however, was miles away, sipping his usual Bordeaux, an untouched plate of sea bass before him, lost in the distant echoes of his own thoughts. Then a ripple. Heads turned, conversations faltered. A woman entered, utterly out of place, yet impossible to ignore. Her clothes were old, worn, but meticulously clean, a faded shawl wrapped tightly around her small frame. In her arms, she held a toddler with soft curls and honey-brown eyes, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them. No one saw her as anything more than an interruption, a momentary breach in their gilded reality, except for Elliot. She moved forward, past the maitre d', who tried, with a helpless gesture, to stop her. Her chin was lifted slightly, not in defiance, but in a quiet, desperate resolve. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply stopped directly in front of Elliot's luxury table. Her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the murmuring restaurant like a physical force. "Can you adopt my son, sir?" Elliot blinked. The words, echoing louder than any high-stakes pitch he'd ever heard in a boardroom, made the entire restaurant fall silent. The woman swallowed hard, adjusting the sleeping child in her arms. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I've raised him since he was left at the church steps. I'm not his mother by blood, but I am in every way that counts." Elliot stared, his usually cold eyes meeting hers. Warm, pleading, utterly exhausted. "I'm dying," she stated plainly. No melodrama, just brutal truth. "Doctors say it's advanced liver failure. I don't have insurance, no family, no time. But I can't leave him alone. He deserves more than alleyways and soup kitchens." The waiter stepped forward again, ready to intervene, but Elliot, with a simple raise of his hand, commanded silence. "I've seen you in the news," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "You said once, before your wife died, you wanted children. I remember because your eyes were different back then." Elliot's heart thudded, a painful jolt. He hadn't spoken her name, Natalie, in 4 years. The woman looked down at Leo, her voice softening with a mother's fierce love. "He's kind. He doesn't cry when he's hungry. He watches clouds and thinks they're animals. He sings himself to sleep. He deserves a chance." Then she looked back up at Elliot, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "My name is Mariah. I don't want your money. I just want someone who won't let him disappear." At that moment Leo stirred, his tiny fingers clumsily reaching out, instinctively, for Elliot's tie. The gentle contact, so innocent, so trusting, made Elliot's body tense. Then, inexplicably, something softened within him. He didn't know why he stood, or why his hands, usually busy signing million-dollar deals, reached out to touch the boy's back. Mariah flinched, unsure if she'd gone too far, if her desperate plea had been too bold. Then Elliot spoke for the very first time. His voice, usually clipped and formal, was now low, hesitant. "Where are you staying?" She blinked, surprised by the simple human question. "The shelter on 8th, but they only let us stay till Sunday." He nodded, and then, in front of a restaurant full of stunned, silent diners, he uttered the unthinkable, the words that would irrevocably alter all their lives. "Come with me. Both of you." The waiter dropped his pen, the clatter echoing in the sudden, profound quiet. "Sir." Mariah's voice cracked, disbelief warring with a fragile hope. "I don't make promises lightly," Elliot said, his gaze firm. "But I've never broken the ones that matter." Leo shifted again, instinctively resting his head against Elliot's chest, and Elliot, who hadn't held a child since the one he'd lost, closed his arms around him without hesitation. A silent, profound surrender. Within moments, Elliot's sleek black town car pulled up, a silent, powerful beast waiting to carry them away. He helped Mariah in, carefully supporting her frail frame. His touch surprisingly gentle. She kept her hands on Leo the entire ride, as if afraid he might vanish, a precious dream dissolving into thin air. Inside his penthouse, a vast, minimalist space that had long mirrored the emptiness of his heart, everything transformed. Blankets appeared, hot soup simmered, and a nurse was quietly put on call. Mariah, after being given a warm bath and fresh clothes, sat on the edge of the guest room bed, her eyes wide, still untrusting, her body tense. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered as Elliot gently placed Leo in a crib nearby. His movement surprisingly tender. "I know," he replied, leaning against the door frame, watching Leo sleep peacefully. "Then why are you doing this?" she pressed, her voice laced with a raw vulnerability. Elliot paused, looking out at the city lights. "Because once," he said slowly, a profound weariness in his voice, "someone gave me a second chance, and I let it die with her." He looked at Mariah, a deep sorrow in his eyes. "I don't want to waste another." The next morning, the sun crept through the glass walls of the penthouse, casting golden hues across cold marble floors and high-end minimalist decor. Everything was in its place. Silent, expensive, untouched. But for the first time in years, it wasn't quiet in the way it had always been. Soft baby coos echoed from the nursery, a sound that resonated deep within Elliot's soul. In the kitchen, the gentle clatter of mismatched ceramic against granite indicated Mariah, who, despite her frailty, had insisted on helping with breakfast. Elliot Vaughn stood at a distance, watching it all from the edge of the hallway, like a man slowly waking into someone else's life. It had been 4 days since Mariah walked into his world like a ghost carrying a miracle. She'd barely accepted his generosity, suspicious of every act of kindness, but never once let Leo leave her side. The baby, however, had taken to Elliot quickly, often reaching for him as if he already knew something none of them did. This morning, Elliot found himself pausing in front of the nursery door more than once, simply listening to Leo babble in his crib, playfully interacting with a stuffed elephant one of Elliot's assistants had rushed in with, along with a truckload of baby supplies. Mariah coughed harshly from the kitchen, a deep, ragged, uncontrolled sound that snapped Elliot out of his reverie. He moved to the door. She was leaning over the counter, one hand pressed against the cool marble for balance, her skin pale, sweat beading across her temple. "You should sit," Elliot said gently, his voice betraying a hint of concern. Mariah looked up quickly, startled. "I'm okay," she lied, a desperate attempt to maintain her pride. "You're not," he stated, walking toward her. She backed away slightly, guarding her dignity like a shield. "I told you I didn't come to be saved. And I didn't offer out of guilt," Elliot replied, his gaze firm. "But if you're staying here, you let me help. No arguments." Mariah's eyes searched his, a flicker of bewildered hope. I'm not used to people meaning what they say." Elliot studied her, a wry half-smile touching his lips. "Neither am I." She turned her head toward the window, her voice softer now, tinged with a deep sadness. "Do you know how many doors I knocked on when I first found him? People slammed them shut, told me to take him to the police, to a shelter, anything to just get out of their sight." "You kept him anyway," Elliot said, his voice quiet. "He kept me," she whispered, a profound truth in those 3 words. A comfortable silence passed between them, filled with unspoken understanding. "I don't want Leo to grow up thinking love is something you have to beg for," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the bustling street below. "He won't," Elliot said, the words coming without conscious thought, solid and final. She blinked, almost afraid to believe him. Later that day, Elliot took Leo to the rooftop garden. The baby squealed with delight at the sight of the koi pond, his tiny hands reaching for the way the leaves danced in the wind. Elliot, who hadn't stepped foot out there in months, found himself laughing too, a genuine, unforced sound that startled even him. Downstairs, Mariah rested, a nurse checking her vitals. Elliot had already contacted specialists across the state, even called in a favor from a world-renowned doctor in Switzerland. They hadn't discussed long-term arrangements yet. Mariah was still trying to figure out how to thank him, still expecting the dream to end. But that night something shifted irrevocably. Elliot was in the study, reviewing emails, when a piercing scream cut through the quiet. He ran fast. Mariah had collapsed in the hallway, her thin frame trembling, blood on her lips. Leo, now wide awake and terrified, cried out from the living room floor. Elliot didn't hesitate. He called his private physician, then knelt beside her and gently gathered her into his arms. "Stay with me, Mariah," he urged, his voice cracking with urgency. "Just breathe." Her eyes fluttered open weakly, filled with an unbearable vulnerability. "I didn't want you to see this," she murmured, shame in her voice. "I'm glad I did," he said, his voice breaking. "You don't have to hide anymore." She spent the night in the emergency room of a private hospital, a flurry of tests, tubes, blood transfusions. Elliot didn't leave her side once. When she woke up in the ICU, her voice was faint, a mere thread of sound. "You don't owe me this." "You said that already," Elliot said, pulling a chair closer, his gaze steady. "And I'm still not listening." Mariah gave a soft, tired laugh, a ghost of her former spirit. "Stubborn billionaire. Exhausted caregiver," he replied, a tender joke passing between them. She turned her head slowly toward the window, looking out at the distant, sparkling stars. "I never thought someone like you would care." Elliot leaned forward, his eyes full of a raw, honest truth. "You didn't see the man I was before Natalie died. I used to imagine kids running through halls like this, a family. Then I stopped feeling anything." He looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. "And then you showed up, with a boy who smiles like he knows heaven. And you, the woman who gave everything without asking for anything back." Mariah wiped at her eyes, tears of gratitude and resignation falling. "Do you know what it feels like to have nothing? To be invisible?" Elliot nodded slowly, the confession heavy on his tongue. "Yes, I've had everything and still felt like nothing." He paused, his gaze fixed on her. "But now there's Leo." Mariah smiled weakly, a fragile, beautiful light. "He changed you already." "He's not the only one," Elliot whispered, looking at her with an intensity that promised a future neither of them had dared to dream of. Back at the penthouse, the nursery was no longer a pristine, untouched space. It was fuller now, warm with the signs of life. Framed photos on the walls, toys scattered playfully across the floor, a mobile of stars spinning gently above the crib. Elliot watched Leo sleep. His tiny fingers curled around the crib bars as if holding on to a better tomorrow. For the first time in years, Elliot picked up a photo of Natalie, his late wife, the only one he'd kept. He studied it, a quiet moment of remembrance, and then, slowly, he placed it into a drawer. Not to forget her, but to make room for the life ahead, the family he hadn't known he was missing. The sound of morning birds outside the vast glass balcony blended with the gentle hum of Mariah's oxygen machine, a stark reminder of the fragile thread holding her to this new reality. The comforting scent of oatmeal lingered in the air. It had all become routine now, a strange new rhythm that Elliot Vaughn, the cold billionaire, had grown to crave more than any boardroom meeting or investment pitch. Leo, now crawling and even standing against the sofa with shaky legs, giggled at his reflection in the living room mirror. Elliot crouched beside him, clad in a sweatshirt and slippers, things he'd never worn before noon, and laughed too. His laughter wasn't stiff like before. It was real, genuine, as if Leo had peeled away a cold armor that years of grief had sealed onto his skin. In the guest room, Mariah lay on a warmed bed, her skin pale, but her smile somehow still radiant. "You two are loud," she teased when Elliot brought her breakfast on a tray. "Leo thinks he's a lion today," Elliot smirked, setting the tray down gently beside her. "You're spoiling him." "Guilty," he confessed, pulling up a chair. "You should have seen the way he tried to fight his own shadow this morning." Mariah chuckled, but her laughter quickly turned to a short, painful cough. "Stop talking," he said softly, concern lacing his voice. "Eat. Rest." "I have something for you," she whispered, reaching under her pillow. He frowned. "Mariah." But she pulled out a single, folded envelope, slightly crinkled, and handed it to him. "Please, open it." Elliot hesitated. He could feel the weight of it, the unspoken gravity, even before reading a word. Inside was a document. Old, a makeshift guardianship declaration handwritten in clear script. "To whoever finds this child," Elliot scanned the page, his chest tightening with an inexplicable ache. "His name is Leo. I am not his mother by blood, but I gave him everything I could. If I do not survive, please find him a life, a name, a father." The final words were the most haunting, etched into his heart. "He deserves a name on paper. Give him one. Give him yours if you can." Elliot looked up at her, his throat dry, his voice a raw whisper. "You wrote this." "I wrote it the night I first coughed blood," Mariah said, blinking back tears. "I didn't think I'd live long enough to find anyone who would even look at us without disgust. Then I found you." Elliot couldn't speak, his fingers trembling as he held the paper. "I want you to be his father, Elliot," she said, her voice clear, resolute. "Not just in action. On record. Legally. Permanently." "You don't need to ask me twice," he said, standing, his voice thick with emotion. "He's already my son in every way that counts." That afternoon, Elliot made the call. His lawyer, Bennett Moore, stiff, skeptical, impeccably polished, was at the penthouse within 2 hours. Bennett had known Elliot for a decade and had never seen his client barefoot, sitting cross-legged on a playmat, holding a teething ring. "You're serious?" Bennett asked after Elliot outlined everything. "Absolutely. The adoption process is long, even for someone with your means. Paperwork, evaluations, court interviews." "I don't care," Elliot said, cutting him off, his voice firm with a newfound conviction. "Start now." Mariah listened from the hallway, silently holding Leo to her chest. Bennett glanced toward her, then the child. "And the mother?" "I'm not his birth mother," she said clearly, stepping forward, her voice strong despite her fragile appearance. "I rescued him. I raised him. But I want him to have a future I won't be around to see. Elliot is that future." Bennett raised a brow, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "And you're willing to sign full custody?" She nodded without hesitation. "It's the only thing I can leave him." The silent confirmation sealed a promise that would change all their lives, weaving them into a family born not of blood, but of profound, undeniable love. Over the next several weeks, the penthouse, once a monument to Elliot's solitary success, truly transformed into a home. And Elliot, in turn, transformed into something else entirely. He began learning how to change diapers without calling the nanny, a small, yet monumental victory in his new life. He memorized Leo's favorite lullabies, his once stiff voice softening into a gentle hum. He learned that holding a baby at 3 a.m. after a nightmare felt more powerful, more profoundly real, than any business deal he'd ever closed. Slowly, heartbreakingly, Mariah began to slip away. Some days she was alert, warm, joking with Elliot like an old friend, a glimmer of her former spirit shining through. Other days she could barely lift her spoon, the illness tightening its cruel grip. But Leo was her light, her anchor. She'd drag herself from bed to sing him songs, her voice fragile but filled with love, whispering stories to him as he drifted off to sleep. One evening, Elliot found her writing again, a quiet, intense focus in her eyes. "What's that?" he asked gently. "A letter," she said softly, her gaze far away. "For Leo." For when he's old enough to ask questions. He sat beside her on the bed. Will you read it to me? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. Dear Leo, she read, her voice quivering, strained by emotion and weakening breath. I don't know what you'll remember about me. Maybe the sound of my lullabies, or the way I held you when thunder scared you. I hope you remember my love because that's all I ever had to give. If you're reading this, it means you're safe, loved, and hopefully calling Elliot Dad. He's a better man than he thinks he is. Let him love you fully, and teach him to laugh even when it's hard. He saved me, just like I tried to save you. She lowered the page, tears streaming down her face, tears of peace and acceptance. I'm not afraid to go anymore, she whispered, her eyes meeting Elliot's, full of a profound gratitude. Not since I met you both. Elliot looked away, his own eyes shining, the ache in his chest a familiar companion. I wish I'd met you sooner, he murmured. You wouldn't have been ready then, she whispered back, a knowing smile. And I wouldn't have known how to ask for help. 2 weeks later, the papers arrived. The final adoption form, signed by the judge, moved by the extraordinary story. Even the lawyer said it set a precedent for a special case. A billionaire adopting a child from a stranger with no legal blood tie, not out of duty, but out of undeniable love. Elliot brought the document into the nursery that evening. He sat in the rocking chair, holding Leo gently in his arms. Leo Cross, he whispered, the name feeling profoundly right. That's your name now. You've got a home, a dad, a future. Leo looked up at him, his tiny face bright with innocent wonder. Then he reached out with both hands and placed them on Elliot's face. For the first time he said it. His very first word. Dada. Elliot froze. And then everything broke inside him. Every wall, every wound, every ghost of the past. He clutched the boy tightly and wept, a raw, full-hearted cry of release, of grief, and of overwhelming love that had finally found its way home. Mariah watched from the doorway, her hand over her mouth, her eyes full of a deep, serene peace. She had done the unthinkable, entrusted her most precious gift to a stranger. And now he had done the unthinkable too, embracing a love he never thought possible. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse nursery, bathing the room in a gentle, sacred morning light. Elliot Cross stood by the crib, gently swaying Leo in his arms. The boy, now walking in wobbly steps and babbling non-stop, had fallen asleep on his shoulder. His tiny fingers curled in Elliot's hoodie string like a vine clinging to a tree. Behind them, the rocking chair sat still, the bed neatly made. The room smelled faintly of lavender and honey, scents Mariah used to love. She was gone now. 2 days earlier she'd passed peacefully in her sleep, just as the doctors had said she might. No machines, no chaos, just peace, a deep, still quiet that came after months of pain. Elliot had found her with her hand resting on a photo of Leo. Her last breath, it seemed, had been spent smiling. The funeral was private, simple. Elliot chose a spot in a quiet garden under a blooming cherry blossom tree. No cameras, no press, just him, Leo, and a gravestone that read, Mariah Hale, a mother by choice, a hero by heart. After the burial, Elliot found one final envelope in her drawer, resting on top of the same faded dress she wore the day she brought Leo to him. It was labeled, To you both for when I'm gone. He didn't open it right away. He waited. Now, in the hush of this morning, he lowered Leo gently into his crib and kissed his forehead. Then he sat at the edge of the bed and opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, a small key, and a folded piece of paper with Leo's footprint from the very first day she found him. He unfolded the letter and began to read. My dear Elliot and my sweet Leo, if you're reading this, I guess I'm already watching you from somewhere better. I hope there are no tears right now, just love and maybe a few laughs if Leo's being his usual messy, loud little self. Elliot, I need you to know something. I never planned to be anyone's mother. I never thought I'd survive long enough to mean something to someone. I was just a girl who had nothing. But then I found Leo in that crate behind a dumpster. Cold, scared, abandoned. And suddenly I had everything. I didn't save him, he saved me. And then you saved us both. You showed up in a world that never wanted us. A world that shuts its doors on girls like me and babies like him. You didn't owe us anything, but you gave us everything. Elliot, you taught me that love doesn't wait for perfection. It just chooses. Thank you for choosing us. Elliot paused, his chest tightened, the kind of ache no medicine could reach. He wiped his cheek and continued reading. Leo, my baby boy, I won't be there to see your first day of school, or when you ride a bike, or when you tell your first joke. Though I imagine it'll be terrible and adorable all at once. But I will be there in the smile you got from me, in the way your little hands reach out without fear, in every warm hug your dad gives you. You are not a mistake. You are not abandoned. You were chosen by me, and now by someone who will never stop fighting for you. Be kind, be curious, be fearless. And when you're older, open the small wooden box under the floorboard of this room. The key is in this envelope. Inside the box is a locket with my picture, one of your baby socks, and the only toy you wouldn't let go of that first night. I hope it reminds you that love finds us, even in dumpsters and penthouses. I love you more than words, my sweet boy. Goodbye, but only for now. Mom. Elliot folded the letter and held it to his chest, his body trembling with the weight of it all. He didn't cry loudly. No, it was a quiet, devastating kind of grief, the kind that reshapes a person from the inside out. He stood, walked to the floorboard, and gently used the key. Inside the box, just like she'd said, were pieces of memory. A tiny fabric locket with a grainy photo of Mariah holding Leo the night she found him, a single yellow sock with a tiny hole, and a well-worn plastic duck with one eye rubbed off. Elliot sat on the floor and held them like relics. He whispered, "You won't be forgotten, Mariah. I'll make sure of it." The months that followed Mariah's passing were slow and, in their quiet way, profoundly healing. Elliot, once the epitome of a ruthless CEO, transformed into a full-time dad, embracing the role with a depth he never knew he possessed. He took a break from the relentless demands of business, stepping away from the cold logic of boardrooms to build a nursery from scratch, filling it with warmth and laughter. He hired tutors not for rote knowledge but for joy, for music, colors and dance, allowing Leo's world to explode with wonder. In a heartfelt tribute to Mariah's selflessness, he established a children's book company in her name, directing all profits to abandoned children and single mothers, weaving her compassion into the fabric of his new empire. Every Sunday became a sacred ritual. Elliot and Leo would visit the quiet garden, sitting beneath the blooming cherry blossom tree, sharing snacks and soaking in the peaceful quiet. Leo would babble happily, pointing at butterflies flitting by, while Elliot read aloud from Mariah's favorite poetry book, his voice gentle, imbued with a newfound tenderness. One day Leo, with the innocent curiosity of a child, looked up and asked, "Who's the pretty lady in the sky?" Elliot smiled through the blur of tears, a bittersweet ache in his chest. "That's your mom, buddy. She's always watching." "Does she miss me?" Leo asked, his small voice full of longing. "She misses us both," Elliot replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But she knows we're okay. She made sure of it." 2 years later, at a gala for children's advocacy, a distinguished host introduced the keynote speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Elliot Cross, father, founder of the Mariah Foundation, and advocate for children in need." Elliot walked onto the stage in a soft gray suit, holding the hand of a boy in a tiny tuxedo, his pride radiating. The crowd applauded, a wave of warmth washing over them. He leaned into the microphone, his voice clear and resonant. "I used to think legacy was about money, titles, and power. But legacy is what you leave in people, not what you leave for them." He glanced down at Leo, a genuine joyful smile spreading across his face. "My legacy called me Dada. For the first time on the day I signed his adoption papers, and I never looked back." 1 week later, back at Rue Montclair, the same outdoor cafe where his life had irrevocably changed, Elliot sat with Leo, sharing a bowl of pasta. A woman passed by, smiled warmly, and asked, "Is he yours?" Elliot smiled, a radiant, undeniable joy in his eyes, and said without hesitation, "Yes, he's mine." She smiled back and walked on, unaware that she had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. A man who once had everything, finally gaining the one thing he never knew he was missing, a family. The end.